Yeah, anyway, I think I'm just gonna kick it off and then we see who'll come join in the process. So, small introduction, my name is Felix. I work in True Blue Tattoo. I've been tattooing for around 10 years, almost. I started my career off drawing mostly mandalas and stuff. Even before I knew I wanted to be a tattooer, I was always drawing those things, and then people would always come up to me like, hey, is that for a tattoo? And I was like, no. And then after they asked for the 12th time, I was like, well, fucking yeah, it is. And then, so after that, that kind of rolled into this job, strangely enough. But yeah, so let's get into this a little bit. I think probably the association that everyone has with geometry at first is like part of math class, which most people kind of dislike. I think it's interesting that geometry is sort of the mathematical description of the universe. Like a lot of things can be described that we see and that grow and that influence the world in mathematical formulae, and this is what we tend to call geometry. So just to give you a small example here, you can see any matter of patterns and stuff in nature, they always have a very geometrical sense to them. So you can have fractal-like patterns like this, splitting off to smaller and smaller pieces, more obvious geometry like the scales and snakes, naturally occurring phenomena like this. And this is anything that's not man-made yet. So geometry is not a thing that's essentially firstly man-made. It already exists, and I think that's a thing that makes it beautiful, makes people appreciate looking at it. I am wondering if we can turn this music down a little bit. Does anyone know that? Do you guys know? Can we turn the music down a little bit? Yeah? I like it though, but I can't hear myself think, and I'm a bit nervous, so. Yes? Hello, nice. Okay, cheers. Thanks very much. Yeah, so this is like pretty much the geometry that nature creates itself, and then from there on there's man who started doing it themselves. And what I think is an interesting thing is that geometry has always been one of the benchmarks of any religious art. Like you will see any religion, they all have their own style and type of geometry that you will see in their buildings, windows, tiling, clothing. Like it's an aspect that naturally comes back in any type of religious art. So that's, I think, the first instances where we see it being handmade by people, even before we start talking about tattooing. And then in tattooing, I think it's also something that can be considered one of the first tattooing arts that ever existed. Like if you look at the oldest found tattoos, they're all like tiny patterns and stuff. So stuff like this found in Africa, or the more older tattooing or more traditional tattooing styles like Maori, Polynesian. And then even if you look at styles like Japanese and traditional, there's always an aspect of geometry, or at least patterns in it. If you look here, like the backgrounds are fairly geometrical in nature, and then in old school, yeah, I mean it's always there. It's there in a lot of different aspects. Only in the last couple of years, I feel it's become a style that really has started to exist on its own. So, was my hand in the way? Okay. I try not to be too Italian in the process. Okay, I'll leave this over here. Yeah, so I think the main tattoo styles that we actually see occurring now that rely on geometry alone, that developed in the last couple of years, would be mandalas, ornamental designs, and patterns. And they're often used together, but I think this is the three sort of pillars of geometric tattooing that exists right now. This is a piece from Andy van Rens. He's also tattooing here, and both are colleagues of mine. Wesley also. I think the interesting thing, just to give a small description of all three, I think the definition of a mandala is a circular repetitional pattern. So you take a center point and then you take an X amount of repetitions that circle around and mirror around a center point, and it doesn't have to be a fixed amount of them. Just they can go around like this. And one thing that I want to point out quickly in this one and in the pattern one is that you see this is what we call dot work. It's one of the main techniques used in geometrical tattooing. And I think if you look at dot work, you always see surfaces. It's surfaces dotted in with a grain. But what I think is important to notice is that it's not as much about the surfaces, it's about the white lines in between. So it's mostly you work in negative space. So you actually draw the piece in white on black, and then the surfaces that are left, you will fill them with a certain tone. I think that's important for later when I start drawing some mandalas, and you can see kind of how I do that. And ornamental, I think, is similar in principle. It's a repeating, often line work design, usually with more organic or more static shapes. In this case, it's all fairly flowery. It's mostly based on just one line weight or two line weights. But similar is in Polynesian and Maori, you will take like a certain shape and then just copy that along a line or along a surface and build this up in layers. Then when looking at patterns, I mean, everyone knows what a pattern is, but it's basically it's a geometric shape that you can align. So in this case, it's all hexagons. In this case, it's triangles, but you can also see this as hexagons. You can also do it with squares, circles, any kind of shape that you can keep attaching to itself. You can consider a pattern. Only once you start doing it with pentagons, then it gets a bit difficult after a while. They start to, kind of break up, but that's like a very nerdy thing that I won't get into today. Then, how to apply this to tattooing. I'm going to give a small introduction on how I approach designing a geometric sleeve. And then from there on, I'm going to take it into tattooing or into designing only a small element, namely one mandala. And I think an important thing to keep in mind with any type of design is the fit on the body. In some styles, it seems to matter a bit less, like traditional tattooing, or you can kind of smash pieces around, and as long as the open space in between is somewhat similar, it doesn't really matter that much. But in designing a sleeve, in most styles, especially where there's not that much skin in between, I think it's important to look at the underneath, the layer underneath, so the muscle groups. Then that way you can kind of define where you want people to look, how the piece is going to flow. So I've made like a rough sketch of in what kind of shapes you could split an arm like this. So you have the shoulder muscle, which is fairly circular, tricep, which is a bit longer, bicep. Then you have this big lower arm muscle, which you can also see as, for instance, the inside of your arm. You can also see as a surface like that. I think it's important to sort of distinguish these surfaces that you can split an arm or any other part of the body into its subsequent muscle groups that are underneath. And then from there you can define a flow that kind of running through it. So roughly I think a flow like this on the arm suits well. S-curves tend to come back in the flow of the body a lot. And in this case I will have them running through the muscle groups, so they kind of split the arm into separate areas. So here's an example that I really like. It's from a French artist, Blanca Ramé Tattooing. As you can see, he's used some similar points of focus. So the tip of the elbow, the ball of the shoulder, and then he's flowing some lines through it to kind of guide the eye through the piece and to make it not too static. Because if you're working with geometric shapes, it's very easy to get a very static design, a very sort of, if you just smash them together, it can be a bit stiff. So I think a flow like this always tends to add a lot in a design. From there, I'm going to show you quickly a very rough, and I was looking at it just now, and actually fairly bad design of a sleeve that I made for this seminar. I don't like it that much, but I hope you guys will forgive me. It's not for a client. But mostly just to pay attention to the aspects that are necessary in a sleeve like this. So I think firstly you want to focus on the flow of the piece. So let's say we add some lines in here like this. That's your foreground. That's your main top piece. And then underneath that you will start with your top layer, which I think are the main focus points, and you can choose either like ornamental, mandala, or patterns. In this case I chose two different mandalas and like a pattern which has like kind of a center point. And in this you can already see there's some dark and some light happening. Then from there you might want to add some different patterns in the background, like over here. And then I think one of the most important aspects of any type of tattoo design, and especially a geometric sleeve like this, is the shading. And then what happens is this creates what I think is the foundation of many different type of tattoo designs, and mostly sleeve designs. Is you need flow, contrast, and depth, and all of these are created using layering and negative space and lines. So if you look at this, the negative space seems to be in the front, even though it's skin, but this kind of guides the eye over the piece. You can kind of look through it. Then the drop shadow like this kind of pushes stuff into the background, so you know what looks in the foreground, what looks in the background. And in general, rule of thumb, it's a thing that's in the foreground is lighter, a thing that is in the background is darker. That's just how anything looks. Little slorky because my mouth is dry. So from there I want to jump to designing a single mandala. So if we just looking at the shapes that I drew on the arm earlier, that kind of like sort of split the arm into separate areas, I think it's nice to make like a bit of a, what's a ruit, a diamond shape mandala. Like this is a shape that's a bit more lengthy. As we go for a design on the arm, it's a shape that will fit naturally in a lot of positions, like on the tricep or on the lower arm. So first I'm going to map out a rough size. Let's say go for something roughly in shape of this. And then before we really get into it, I want to draw your attention to the three aspects that I think are important in what I said, the sleeve. It's contrast, depth, and flow. And as we're designing a single piece, I want all three of those elements to also be in the single piece, especially if it's going to be only this tattoo. If someone wants only this, not necessarily the full sleeve, I think it's important to keep those things in mind. So you can start by just immediately drawing the details and just making shapes, and they will repeat automatically, but I think it's better to have a rough sort of general shape and feel that you want to have on the whole thing. I do want to note that now I'm drawing one in Procreate. I think you guys are probably all familiar with Procreate. Are you guys actually tattooers, or it doesn't really matter? Okay, anyway, the main program that people tend to use for any type of tattooing purpose is Procreate. It's actually not fantastic for drawing geometry and mandalas because it doesn't have that many options like that. So if you want to do more stuff, I'd recommend you use Amaziograph, PaintStorm, or Geometrica. But for now, for all means and purposes, we're going to stick to this. So I think it works fine. I'm going to set it to radial geometry, which is the maximum amount of repetitions that this program does, which is 4. And then I'm going to just roughly sketch out what I think is going to be the main contrast of the piece. So let's start with kind of a light center, going to a bit more dark, like we have something kind of light, and here we'll switch to, let's keep this light, and then out here we can go a bit darker. Yeah, so we can kind of split it into 4 sort of regions. Let's change it to 1 geometry less, and then here we'll go for more of a gray. So what this does, why this is useful to use as a base for any type of mandala, I think, even though you don't see any geometry in it yet, is that you have something that from a distance you can still recognize it. Like if you tend to just immediately go and give everything a certain tone or a bunch of different tones, from a distance it's going to look gray, and that's just not what you want. You want a tattoo to be visible from as far as possible, that it looks nice. So this is just a general hierarchy that I'm going to keep in mind when drawing the rest of the tattoo. So I'm going to make this a bit lighter and add something in here so we don't see this whole arm through it. But there we go. And then now I'm going to play around a little bit between the styles. So I'm going to go for both dot work surfaces and line work, like more ornamental surfaces. And I think in the middle we're going to start with dot work. So first what I'm going to do is add a black layer. And like I said earlier, what I think dot work is very often is a negative space. So that's why I first created dark layer. So we have this negative background, and then on top of that, I'm going to work with white to carve out the lines of the main design. As you see here, for anyone who's familiar, I've set up a couple of different brush sizes. I think this is useful when working in geometry because then you know that you have a constant size. Like if I go here and draw a couple lines and then I want to make a bigger line and then I want to have the exact same line thickness again, I'm not going to be able to find it. So it's useful to set up these things. Okay, so let's get into it over here. Maybe we can go a bit bigger for this. I'm curious how this is going to turn out. Usually when I draw on my own they always look nice, but now of course with an audience it's probably going to go to shit, but we'll see. Yeah, let's just start with some layers pointing to the center. And then yeah, let's end it off in a nice square. I think it's kind of nice. No, actually no. Let's do this. I think that's kind of nice. One thing I like to do, just to tighten everything up a little bit, is to cut off the corners of everything so it looks sharp. Yeah, like this I think is kind of nice. And then after this we're going to do a layer of some line work to make it a bit lighter. So I'm going to add a layer of white and then let's create a new layer. One thing that I think is important about working digitally is the fact that you can work non-destructively. Like you can keep changing your layers, you can have stuff in different layers, so you can keep coming back into it, changing stuff. It's not like a drawing on paper where if you want to change something you have to erase it and then redraw it. And I think that's one of the most useful things of producing any art digitally. But then it does need to be done correctly. If you end up merging all your layers and you want to take out some color, you're going to have the same problem. So try to be consistent in designing that way. So let's skip to a different layer. I'm going to make this a bit lighter so I can see the underlying sketch that we've been working on. And then we'll go for some black lines to see if we can go for a more ornamental piece. I want to keep it a bit lighter here. Like I said, this area in the original design is white, so I'm going to not be putting too much stuff in there. Let's see, maybe yeah, I don't hate this. So stick with it. The type of shape that you use in any kind of design, you can play around with it, whatever. I like to use shapes that you see coming back in more oriental styles or more religious art. So you can have shapes that you see reoccurring in, like for instance, Thai art or any other type of art like that. Oh, sorry. Keep not putting my arm in front of the camera. Okay, let's do something like that. We have a second layer. Then for the next one, I'm going to go back into our original dot work layer and then see if we can draw in there. So first I'm going to take out the white of this one, like that. And then on top of that we can draw again in white. We take the same line thickness and then let's put some stuff in there. Okay, again, I'm going to just sharpen up these edges just to make it a bit tighter looking. I mean, this thing is going to be far from perfect, but this is a nuance that I don't really want to skip. Also, I think a thing to keep in mind while you're designing mandalas is you can very easily create many of them. It goes fairly fast, especially if you work with a program where you can make it like replicate 25 times, like just to show you something like this. Like this goes very fast. Like here you can just fuck around like that and immediately you have like something that could be considered cool looking if you put in 5 minutes. I'm just not showing it in this program right now, but just know that you can in an hour easily design like 5 or 6. So it's a nice thing to play around with. But do keep in mind if you're actually going to tattoo them, that because you design them that fast, you can easily in 10 minutes design a piece that's going to take you the whole day to tattoo. So see if you can at least design it in a way that's going to be fun tattooing it for you, because sometimes I've made them in a way that I'm working on, I'm thinking, fuck, this is taking forever. I could have made this so much more efficient and so much better looking, but it's not something you think about because you draw them so quickly. So let's go in here. I think this is good, so I'm gonna again add like some white around this, and then we'll add one last layer of line work on top of that. And here I'm going to change it to a quadrant symmetry so we can make it a bit more pointy and have it sort of end in a more diamond shape that we can easily fit to muscle groups like the tricep or the bicep or maybe the calf muscle, something like that. Are you guys liking the convention so far? Did you see any cool shit? You guys? This is the coolest thing you've seen so far? For sure. Okay, so let's do something like this. Maybe here we added in a small point just as something is happening. Okay, I think for now this is fine. I think this is pretty fun looking. So from here we can go to the details. We can split it into more tones. We can change it so it's a bit more of an interesting design, because now you can see it's really split into dark and light. So we're going to add some shading. Shading, or at least different tones, I think in this case are done by using different types of dot work, like either different tones or gradients, and then adding layers of shading over top. So let's first play around a bit with the center. So I'm going to go underneath my line work layer, but on top of my black layer. And this, I think, is important, is now I make sure that I keep it separated, because after this I can still use the separate layers if I want to change stuff or go into making a stencil, which I will show in a bit. So let's see, I'm using a kind of dot work brush to sort of mimic the effect of dot work. If you guys like it, I can share it to you. They're also fairly easy to make. There's a number of different tutorials on YouTube that show how to do it. I think this is kind of nice. It makes the center sort of glow. Let's do the same on the outside, that we kind of go from a dark to light tone. I think this is not bad. And then let's add some layers of shading on top of the black. So here I'm going to just add another shading layer. And in this case, I'm going to go for just a soft brush. Right now I feel very Bob Rossi talking about different soft brushes and stuff like that. But just color a layer like this. And then from there, actually we can do this quicker by adding a mask and then coloring that in. I hope this isn't too much hocus pocus for people who don't use Procreate. I think the principles are the same in any type of drawing, like even if you do this by hand or if you do it on paper or any different type of program, the tricks or the mechanics underneath are pretty much the same. And then let's make this a bit lighter so this kind of sticks out. And then I'm adding another one on the inside. If it works. So this is of course what's happening when you have to do a demonstration, is everything is not working. There we go. Okay. So let's erase that. There we go. So we have this thing nicely split into like a couple layers. We have this foreground with this glowing center with the line work beneath that, and then beneath that we have another layer of dot work, and then behind that we have this. Maybe we can add some tones in that last part to make it a bit more, give it a bit more depth. I'll do it by hand. Yeah, just add a little bit more like that to make it a bit more, give it a bit of a different tone. Okay, there we go. I think this is not a terrible design. I don't think I'm going to be selling it, but I think it looks pretty good. So from here, I want to show quickly how you can turn this into a stencil if you want to make sure that you don't have to retrace the whole thing to turn it into a stencil, to actually use it like that. So what I would do is save this, just so you keep having the original as a reference. You can also just go in here and duplicate this, so you still have a replica of it, because I'm going to be deleting some stuff. So first, let's take out the shading. Here we go. So now we're left with like kind of the bare bones. This is usable as a stencil. You can print this and just, if you would, you can stick this on the skin. Only thing I'm not too fond of is having these huge black surfaces on the skin, because it's a bit annoying to work on these, because you already have a very dark tone, and then if you have to fill it in, you might not be able to see if the tone is the correct tone, especially if you're using lighter gray washes. So what I tend to do is now merge my white layer with my black layer. So this is one thing. And what you can do is this pretty neat trick, is add a Gaussian blur to it. So you see how the edges go kind of foggy. Do that a couple %. And then you go into your curves and you drag this into a U curve. And because it's created some grays in the edges, it's now turning those grays into blacks. So let's sharpen this up a bit. And now you have something that's a bit more easy to follow than having a fully black surface. And then if you want to make it a little bit more readable that these are surfaces that you're going to be dotting instead of filling in, you can maybe add like some white lines, just make them dotted lines, so you're not accidentally lining these in your final piece. So this for me is a very usable stencil. This would work really well to me. One more trick I can show you guys. If you add a white layer and then merge your lines onto that, turn on multiply so it keeps being invisible. Say you want to change your line thickness, like maybe your clients want the lines a bit thinner or thicker, or if you print it to a certain size, the lines are not the right thickness. You can use a similar trick as what we did just now by adding a Gaussian blur to this. You need to make sure you have the white background, otherwise this doesn't work, so that's why I did that. And then now you can go to curves, slide it this way, or slide it this way to make your lines thinner. In this case, let's maybe make them a bit blacker. Actually not. It looked fine the way it was. This is just a good trick to use, I think. Bye. This is just a good trick to use if you want to change your line weight anyway. Then, as a stencil, one more trick that I think is very useful if you want to stencil geometric design like this on an arm. Say you want to stencil it exactly in the middle of something. So you want to have it exactly in the middle of the tricep. Like, you will draw a line on the tricep, like with marker, as the center line. So let's just, okay, I'm just going to do this in here really quickly to kind of demonstrate how you would do this in real life. Let's just put an arm in there real quick. There we go. Okay, so let's take the back of an arm like this. And then you want to print it, or you want to stick it directly to the center of the tricep. So you want to have it on this line. So imagine now you drew this on the skin with marker. You have your stencil, which I'm getting in here. And you've cut out your stencil. You've cut out the paper. And you're kind of holding over it to see, where is it going to go? Is it going to fit? And then you can kind of sort of see like, in the top here and the bottom there, that seems to line up. But sometimes this can be a bit difficult. What's a useful trick is to fold the paper in half and then make some small holes in it so you can look through it. Other thing you can do is fold it double. So you cut off half pretty much. You fold it like this, and then you can still line it up to the skin, stick it on, fold it out, and then it works well like that. So, this is my demonstration today of how I design mandalas. This is by no means the only way to do it. It's just a way that I think is useful. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? Thanks. Okay. Thank you very much.